Hey, my name is Omari Newton. Welcome to the UBCP Actor Diversity Roundtable discussion. Today we're going to be featuring MENA actors, which stands for Middle Eastern or North African Identifying, which is a whole conversation in and of itself. How has your ethnicity or cultural background defined your career, or has it defined your career? Open question.
That's a hilarious open question.
I mean, I have a lot of guilt about that. I'm a very physical guy, and I come from a background of martial arts, and I played football for a long time. So when I got into the film and TV industry, I very quickly gravitated towards the stunt and the action world. So the combination of my ethnicity and my ability to be thrown from things or hit by things made me the guy that people wanted to cast in their movies and kill. So I've worn suicide vests, and I've said Allahu Akbar and been shot more times than I care to remember. And so, I think the world has changed. And I, as an artist and as a human being, have changed and have learned more. And so I still have a lot of guilt about how my ethnicity defined my career early on. I knew about stereotypes. I knew about the damage I was causing by reinforcing those stereotypes. But, you're starting out in the film and TV industry, and you want to take opportunities. And I had this philosophy of the way you get out of a stereotype or out of typecasting is through the top. So I was like, if I'm going to be the terrorist guy who you fight and stab and shoot, I'm going to be the best of those guys, and then they'll start to see me as an actor. And so and that's still a constant struggle because they still love to kill folks who look like us, and so I still get, offered those parts, and it's still a constant day-to-day struggle to fight against that.
Can I ask a question?
Please, yeah.
So when did you start acting in film and television? What year was that?
99 or 2000.
So prior to 9/11, 2001, I mean, there was not a lot of parts for people who were Middle Eastern. I mean, I've been doing this a long time. So, I mean, I say this jokingly, but it's not jokingly. Before 9/11, I think I played 3 Middle Eastern people. And prior to 9/11, there was maybe once every year and a half a substantial role for a Middle Eastern character. And there was the catch-22, which is, well, there's no names to play the part, so we can't make somebody a name. One that sticks with me was around 2000 or 99 was a movie called The 13th Warrior. And the character was a Moor who goes with the Vikings. And they were looking at Hollywood for somebody who was Middle Eastern or Arabic, and they're like, well, I guess Antonio Banderas will do. Okay, so
And the accent is almost
so
Middle
close.
Eastern.
So close. But it's a catch-22, which is you couldn't create an Arab star without giving somebody a break. Then 9/11 happened. This is when I was in law school, and it's a terrible thing that I've shared with many people, which is in that moment, I was my first week of law school. I was like, oh, I'm going back to Hollywood.
Wow.
I knew that things would change, which is there's a new villain. For many years in the 80s and the 90s was the Russians, the Latinos, the African Americans were the villains, and then, what happens is that you become the villain du jour, and now it's evidenced if you watch American television or movies, they're now the ally. You can't just have a bad Arab terrorist. You have a guy on the team who's like, I speak the language. Let me tell you what they're saying.
Yes.
So it's changed somewhat, but in that moment they're like scrambling. Who is actually Arabic? Who is this thing? And in the beginning they didn't get it right. They got a lot of Indian guys doing it, and now it's like, no. You go into a room and they say, where are you from? They write it down. Do you speak this language? There was a movie a few years ago, Argo. They would not audition you if you did not have an Iranian passport. Okay, like they had someone in the room with you doing the audition with you in Iranian, in Farsi. So it's changed, but I was going to say before 9/11, an Arabic guy, you could just change your name. You're like, you're Italian, whatever. Like, there was no parts.
Now, I'm curious to hear for the women, what do you find these stereotypes associated with being a MENA-identified woman are, and have those changed?
My experience is different. When there is an Israeli role that comes up, I get quite excited. One of my first roles was on a show called White Collar, and it was originally written as a Turkish think she was a fashion model, and in the course of the thing, she ends up having to, they use her to spy on someone because she knows the language. But then in the audition, they found out I was Israeli. And so they rewrote it and made her Israeli. It didn't really, I mean, yeah, and the terrorist guy was Israeli. Or, I don't even, you know, so that, I don't know, I didn't feel like I was misrepresenting anything. I was just happened to be Israeli.
Sure.
I found it's been interesting because I am fair. And Lebanese, I mean, I'm half, but Lebanese, they're fair. A lot of them are fair. So a lot of time when they're asking for an Arab role and I go out, they're like, she's too light. Oh no, she's not Arabic, she doesn't have the nose, you know? So that's been interesting. And as a result, I'm kind of like ethnically ambiguous. So they can put me in different, she's Latin, she's this, and then.
And so a question for you, Marcus, as a writer, did you find that 9/11 was a seminal moment in what you were writing and what people were expecting you to write?
Yeah, it's interesting. So as a writer, I'd actually been focusing on questions around the Middle East and my experience as the child of a Middle Eastern immigrant prior to 9/11. Like I wrote a show called True Lies that was like deconstructing, if you remember the 90s with the Schwarzenegger movie, awesome movie, True Lies. And the kind of terrorist kind of mythology or stereotype for a long time. But interestingly, like, and in a way kind of reverse and the same as you guys, I got my first series at CBC on the heels of 9/11 because that series was a satirical deconstruction of what happened in 9/11. So in fact, the fact that I was able to bring a kind of critical voice to our representation was in fact relaunched my career. I was like 30 years old, like in a really significant way that I don't have to have guilt about. I get to feel like the good guy, right? Because it's actually critical, but very much the same phenomenon, I would say. And I'm also super interested in this question about individual responsibility. Like what your individual responsibility. I think that's a red herring, and I think it's ideological. This notion that we as individuals, like we work in an industry. I mean, my industry is less of a commercial industry than your industry, but we work in an industry, and to ask individuals working to bear moral and ethical responsibility for the ideological like perspective or construct of that industry, I think that's actually a way that those ideological constructs get perpetrated. I don't think you should be feeling guilty about working.
Like when I performed at the White House, I think a lot of people were expecting me to walk in with a burqa. Like I think they actually mentioned it. They're like, well, what, like you're Afghan? I'm like, yeah, I'm Afghan. I just flew in from Afghanistan. And they're like, but don't you guys wear that long blue burqa? And I'm like, yeah, you know, and again, with any Middle Eastern, like, oh, maybe uneducated or maybe, you know, oppressed or maybe this and that, but they don't realize. And just our latest movie that me and Anousha were working at, they hired my dad as the cultural advisor and the religious advisor and the language advisor. And it was so good to see that they were asking before they like, and they made a lot of changes in the script because of that, because, you know, they had seen it as a Canadian writer, obviously, how like, and they did say, like, you know, we tried as much as we could to get as much information as possible, but there's still things that, like minor details that we will miss.
So I did build my career in both film, television, and also in theater, playing all these kinds of, funny enough, I was mentioning this to you, I have never played a Persian character. And I'm an Iranian guy who's Persian. And I've never actually have played a Persian. I have played all kinds of different Middle Eastern guys, you know, Arabs, all kinds of from many different countries.
Amirs,
and also,
how many Amirs have you played?
Yeah, exactly. I've played many Amirs and Alis and Hassans and Hosseins. But I've never played, and also I was going to just add to that, I've also played a lot of Indian characters as well, funny enough. And so for me, that was the beginning of my career, both in theater and also in film and television. Theater slowly started shifting towards being a little bit more open in terms of how they were perceiving me, not just because, you know, I was becoming a more experienced actor, maybe that as well, but also I think times were changing a little bit quicker for theater. So I felt that I was going out, I mean, maybe that has to do with the fact that I was also going out for a lot of Shakespeare characters at the time that are obviously not Middle Eastern. other than maybe Othello that's a Moor, you know, that's the only character I can think of. But film and television was behind, and for myself, I found that I was stuck in that category for a long time, and I was riding the wave, and I was getting all these gigs, and I was, obviously my career, I was getting somewhat known in Toronto, where I started off. But then I got tired of being cast in that sort of group of categories for film and television. That's why I started sort of shifting a little bit more towards theater and, you know, just expanding my range of characters. And things started to slow down probably by 2010 and 11 in the film and television industry, because now I guess a shift was happening. But I was not going out anymore for characters that were, for any type of roles, to be honest. Like my amount of auditions started slowing down. And it wasn't until that big sort of attack happened again, I can't remember which part, probably the Paris one, I guess, but by ISIS. And then Prison Break started filming here, and all these characters started, you know, coming out. I was going out for like 10, 12 auditions, you know, in a week. And, you know, I had a conversation with my agent at the time, and he was saying, you know, this is the time we're waiting for. And I got extremely upset and mad about it, because that's not how I see myself as an actor, playing the one type, especially playing all these kinds of different roles in theater. I can't say to myself that I'm an actor just playing a Middle Eastern guy who's going to go and, you know, explode something or himself or something.
But now this leads to an interesting question that Marcus had brought up, and this is what I want to pose to the group next. What, if anything, do you think the responsibility of an actor or an artist is in terms of the roles that you take and how you think that's shifting perceptions? Do you, because a lot of the concept of guilt has come up a lot, right? And I think I'm sort of on the side with Marcus when I say I don't think that is something that I would impose on someone for a number of complex reasons, but I'm curious to hear your guys' thoughts on that.
Well, again, culturally to me is important to have an understanding of, again, I played a lot of Afghan roles. Iranians and Afghan people were very close in terms of culture, but yet we're from different countries. And so, and I have played a lot more Afghan characters because of the situation in Afghanistan, right? My job as an actor, regardless, is to have an understanding of their culture so that I can, in my view, portray the character as best as I can, so that I don't feel that guilt of just, you know, making a stereotype of a terrorist or whatever the character is. And so, you know, going with that as well, it is a responsibility that I feel as well, because I feel that if I'm taking on a character, I need to commit 100% in terms of obviously understanding the character, but also understanding the culture that goes with it. And I think there's a lot of lack that we see nowadays of that part of it, the culture part. A lot of guys are getting cast just because they're looking like the, you know, a Middle Eastern guy, and maybe they can pull it off.
I don't think there has to be guilt as long as you're coming at it as an artist and telling a story. I guess it just becomes a problem if that's the only thing you're being offered.
Right.
And that it's the only type of Middle Eastern person that TV is representing, right?
It exists, more or less.
That's where the guilt comes from. And you, as a performer, generally don't control that. Like the roles are offered. Here are the Middle Eastern roles you can play. Which terrorist would you like?
I think the question of social responsibility changes depending on your profile as a performer and on the influence you actually have on the creative process. So I think writers do have a different responsibility than actors do. And I think day players have a different responsibility than series leads do. And I think, and maybe where I'm at in my career is I do feel a lot of guilt because I feel like there are situations where I feel like I exert a certain amount of influence. Where if it's a small enough production and they were a fan of Homeland and they're dying to have me on the show, I feel like I have a voice. I'm like, okay, if I'm gonna participate, then, you know, can we reopen the script and re-examine where this character is actually from? And can we explore this, and I've been on a couple of series now where I felt I had access to the creative process. Where I felt, and in one particular case, the writer at the beginning of the series said, I'm a Jewish guy from New York, and I made this Middle Eastern character, but I would love for you to fill in the blanks. There's a lot of stuff I don't know and I don't understand. So anything you can do to add authenticity. And by episode 2, I was like, send me episode 3 as soon as you can, and I will send you some notes and thoughts. And I was part of the conversation, and I felt like I was doing my share. By the same token, they have to be ready to reopen the creative process, just like they did with your character, who started out as Turkish and whatever, and then they said, oh, the actress is Israeli, let's make her Israeli. I think that's the real way to affect change in our industry, is for them to create a space for the character, cast someone, and then go, now let's actually make a character by combining who we have in the role with the role that we've written, which I think is a process that occurs in the rehearsal process in the theater world, especially when developing new works. But for some reason, we don't have that.
I think, just jump in on that briefly, like, I think one of the reasons I, as a young artist, actor, but also writer, gravitated towards theater at a really young age was that I actually had control over those things. So like immediately, because it's a less commercial industry and less money involved and all that, that I suddenly had way more control. And I think, I think the way you're kind of delineating different levels of power within industry is really, really important, because ultimately it's all about power and all about how power gets exercised. And then the only thing I would add to what you said in terms of writer's responsibility, which I 100% agree with, it's ultimately it's about producers' responsibility, right? Like this is a highly capitalist environment we're in which money making is the priority. Fortunately, we're beginning, I think, to have some examples of, production, Black Panther being the obvious one, where productions were, but also out of some of the Me Too stuff, like productions that would have been dismissed as in absolutely no way anybody would be interested enough for this to make money, is proving to be wrong. Us MENA types, it's going to be a while, I think, in the North American context.
Why do you say that with such self-deprecating?
Because I think the political position that we're in the culture is highly compromised and suspect.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying. I didn't know what this panel was going to be today, and like I live in LA most of the time, and they go, oh, there's a Middle Eastern character, and the agent clicks my name and submits me, right? But what I'm looking to do in my career is, why do I have to go only because it says Middle Eastern? Why can't I be the guy who's the agent down the street? Right. So I have an anecdote, which is about 10 years ago, my agent with a pretty good agency in LA, and I said, and I'm looking to get on a series regular, like a sitcom, right? So I go, what about this one about the people who are, it's called Up All Night. They're all people who were in a cafe, and there's a guy on his laptop. And I'm looking for somebody who's not related to anybody else in the show. So they can't say, well, you can't be the dad because this is good. Okay, so I'm the guy by an island unto himself. And he goes like this, he goes, well, the character's like Ivy League. And I went, yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and he goes, and I go, I don't know if you've been to Ivy League recently. They're like Indian and Iranian, like a lot of the guys. He's like, well, I don't know. And like he was like, he didn't see it. This guy was a white bread guy, Ivy League looking guy. Who got the role in the end? John Cho. Because John Cho was doing it to his agent. Why can't I be in a show where I'm not playing a guy with an accent, doing karate? Yeah. Okay? Jesus. So now I just saw John Cho is starring in a movie about being a dad whose daughter is abducted, the new Grudge movie, okay? He actually surpassed it, okay? But he was just a stereotype for years, playing the Asian guy or whatever. So, how do you get out of well, there's nothing in this for you? Well, why isn't, they're like, oh, well, there's no terrorists. I'm like, you know how many parts I do? People go, you play terrorists. I'm like, not really. Anything that's Middle Eastern, like, you're a terrorist. I'm like, it's comical to me.
Yeah, no, and I 100% agree with you. My personal interest as a writer is actually writing things that challenge that, right? So that's the perspective I come from, but like from a performance perspective, could not agree more.
Right.
I'm curious to explore a question with you. So you've talked about using your position in the industry now to kind of assert your influence when you can, right? But I find there's another type of leverage and power you can have with social media, right? Wow. And I know from my experience, I was on a pretty offensive show that was quite misogynistic and wasn't in line with what I believed in, but I was able to build a platform from it, which I've then used to speak about things that are important to me.
Exactly.
So as someone with a big following, I'm curious, do you use your platform to speak to issues that you find are relevant to you?
Well, the only reason that I got into the entertainment world is to have a voice and to use these platforms. So the media is the most powerful platform that you can have to bring awareness, to raise your voice, to speak on things that, important issues. Like I'm a women's rights activist. I said, well, how can I get to a certain level where I can reach a massive audience through music and through acting and through social media. So like by doing music, I actually gained all these following, like a huge following on social media. So I use that constantly on, bringing up topics, and some of my followers, they're like, well, they get mad at me because I bring up a lot of topics that, issues that happen inside Middle Eastern countries, for example, with women and oppression and child abuse and all that stuff. And they say, well, now you're starting to get a following outside of Afghanistan and the Middle East, like you're starting to get Canadian followers or North American followers. They're gonna look down on us if you keep posting these things, because I'm like, yeah, but this is the truth. This is what needs to change, and I'm using my platform to bring awareness so that you guys can change your ways and people can start, doing things differently. So the fear that people have, I can see that through social media. When I post something and I expose something that's actually really happening, people start freaking out about it, and they're like, oh, we don't want North Americans knowing about this horrendous thing that's going on inside our country. I'm like, well, then change it, right? Because it's the truth. I'm not gonna hide it because I'm ashamed of it. This needs to be spoken about. So yeah, I use my social media, like it's number one, and trying to make a difference.
And if I can add to that, because I'm aware that young actors may be coming at it, and the world is way more woke now, and I think there are a lot more opportunities for young actors to come at it with a social conscience, and it could be debilitating for a lot of them. And the solace I found in those young years when I was playing these stereotypes was that I was going to take the job, but I was going to treat it with more humanity than the next guy. And I was going to give this guy a story, whether he had a name, whether his only line was Allahu Akbar. I was going to inject a bit of humanity and treat it with more sensitivity than the next guy would. Because I was aware that if I walk away from this, there's 6 other, probably South Asian guys who will step into the role. So I'm not going to make a difference.
Right. So, sorry, go ahead,
It's
please.
true. That's, I find that as an actor, when I'm given a role that is of Middle Eastern descent, like right now I've got one for a Syrian refugee, my goal is to find the person, because we have this view of that is this, and they're uneducated and they don't know this. So my goal is always like, how do I make this human come alive so that we can see that we're three-dimensional?
Maybe she's watching the football game.
Right?
You know what I mean?
Maybe she has the 2 degrees.
Yeah, well, that's to me
That's the
one of
other
the
thing,
real
right?
representation issues too, and you've kind of alluded to it as well, which is like that kind of sanctimonious kind of reverse perspective in which a Syrian refugee is all victim, couldn't possibly watch football, couldn't possibly tell someone, you know what I mean? Like that level, it feels to me like there's opportunity in there to do the kinds of things that you guys are talking about, which is to say, hey, maybe this person is just full of flaws and normal and like all and
spunk.
And
like, not like
and not just like
and
pure
hiding,
submissive,
and
like that.
human.
All that
Well,
bullshit is just infuriating.
That's my next general question. I know for me, as a black actor coming up, Denzel Washington was a hero of mine. Who were your heroes coming up, or were there any?
I said this to somebody earlier about coming here today. I said, I wanted to be an actor since I was a small kid growing up, and I used to watch the Brady Bunch every day after school. And I said this to my father years ago. I said, when I watch television, you lose yourself in the show. And I said to my dad that the television screen is not a reflective screen. It is an immersive experience. So growing up, I thought I was part of the Brady Bunch. Only when I started acting. And I don't know if anybody knows me this long. I used to have very long hair. I played American Indian. I was playing, early on. So I went to the auditions. They're like, great, we'd like you to come back tomorrow for the role of Ravin. And I was like, Ravin, what? And they're like, I'm here for Dave. They're like, no, you're going to come back for Ravin. I'm like, what? What are you talking about? Whoa. So I realized very quickly that it's not how you view yourself. It is how the world views you. So I never, to answer your question, my hero growing up was Eddie Murphy. Okay? And to quote John Turturro in the great movie, Do the Right Thing. He was like, well, he's not black. He's more than that. You know what I'm saying? So that race became irrelevant when these people achieved stratospheric, status. So I don't know. Look, growing up, then you go, oh, who am I? Who can I be? Like what's a career that I can follow? I don't know. People bring up Ben Kingsley a lot, and they're like, well, Ben Kingsley. I'm like, his real name is Krishna Banju. And he was not allowed in the Dramatic Academy in England because he was Indian. He came back the next year, changed his name to Ben Kingsley, and voila, you have a career now. So I mean, a big part of this MENA aspect is what's your name? Okay, if my name was, you know, Baljit Singh, I'd have a different career. I mean, I've had a very good voiceover career because my name is Michael, and my last name, they don't know what it is. So when you hear me talk on the thing, my first voiceover job was Ken for Barbie and Ken. Okay, so I mean, what does Ken look like? Me? I don't know.
Right.
Okay, it was a blonde and blue-eyed character when they did it.
Sure.
So I mean, to answer your question, I just wanted to act.
So film and TV are visual mediums, right? So, and the way you look often defines what you get to play. But there's also this thing about like what you are and what you're allowed to play. And I'm curious to hear your guys' thoughts about like how much do we need to burden ourselves with this idea of I'm this thing, so this is what I can play.
I think one thing that occurs to me about what we're allowed to play is the opportunities that are missing for people of color. And I think one way that we can start to affect change is by creating more opportunities for people who look different than the status quo. And then I feel like, can I play South Asian? Can I play Latino? Can I play these other things? And maybe I can, maybe I'm able to. But if I do, I'm taking away an opportunity from someone who has limited opportunities and may not get another one. And they are going to represent that character and that culture in a way that from the outside, I'm not going to. I'm not saying it's better or worse.
I want to share an anecdote. This is about, I remember, 12 years ago, and I was at a party in Vancouver, and the actor Cliff Curtis was there. If anybody knows who Cliff Curtis is. He's a Maori New Zealand actor.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so, and I go up to him jokingly and I say, you're my nemesis, okay? Because I've been going for parts that he was getting. He goes, my nemesis is Tony Shalhoub and John Leguizamo. And he starts to explain to me that every time in Hollywood, he would go for a Latino role, the lead role, they'd give it to Leguizamo to be, you know, respectful with the Latinos. And to be Arab American, they give it to Tony Shalhoub.
Right.
And he goes, I finally was cast as, who was it, Fidel Castro in a movie. He goes, and I had the part, but the studio said there's no way we're going to do this movie with a non-Latino in the lead role.
Right.
And he said, and he explained to me very clearly, he goes, when it's a supporting role, there's no focus on you. You're not the spokesperson or the poster child for this race. And like you're saying, if it's a series regular, if it's a show, I remember I went a couple years ago for the show about the office workers in India. It was called Outsourced. Okay, I go to be the Indian guy and do the accent, the whole thing, and I know, and the woman casting me knows, there's no way they're going to cast me, because when you get on the Tonight Show to promote the show, I can't go, I'm a Canadian Jewish guy playing, you know, they can't do it. The show is canceled before it starts, okay? So they have to, and they did in the end. They hired a guy, a Canadian guy, Rizwan Manji, who's of Indian background, and he went on the Tonight Show with Jay Leno, and Jay Leno literally was like, look, we got a guy who's really, and your parents are really from India, and you're really a Muslim, this and that. The whole thing, it's like, look, America, we can do this.
But I'll add,
that's what it is.
That is a relatively new concern of Hollywood, though.
Yeah.
It's a new concern, and I'll tell you, it's cut into my bottom line. Because it used to be, I could do it, and they're like, but you're not really, I'm like, oh my God. So now it's getting less and less and less.
Right.
So I just want to be an actor, like I said, but now they're saying, you can't, we need a real Afghan actor, because this is about the Afghan plight of what, you know. So it's gone the other way. The pendulum has swung the other way. Yeah,
So this
I
must
feel.
have changed recently then.
The last few years, you'll see.
No, I was just going to say in the theater world, I was cast as, it was a new play at Bard on the Beach called Shakespeare's Rebel, and I was cast as Shakespeare. I never thought I would ever.
That's awesome.
I have been a fan of Shakespeare my whole career, and I've been in many Shakespeare plays, but I never thought I would actually play the character of Shakespeare, ever.
Amazing.
But the fact that I was given the opportunity, that to me was probably one of the, even though, you know, it was not, I don't want to talk about the play itself, but anyways, it has its own history. But the fact that I played Shakespeare, and I have that on my resume, that to me is one of the highlights of my career, because it's not Amir or Ahmad or any of the characters that I've played in the past. And for me, as a guy who is Iranian-born, Middle Eastern guy, look-wise, this is what I thrive to have a lot more, especially in the film and television world, That's what I want, the opportunity to be seen as a guy who can play Shakespeare.
Transformative role and or project, and why? If we can go around the room and get that from everybody.
In relationship to these issues, I'd say creating a character named Ali Ababwa, who comes from Agrabah, derived entirely from Disney's Aladdin, and first on this radio series, and then for several years touring a show that really was made in response to being told after 9/11 that we were not allowed to laugh anymore, that laughter was done. I don't know if you remember that we said we will never laugh again. That was 2 weeks after 9/11, we were laughing, and was constructed entirely as a way of like embodying a character that is supposedly Middle Eastern and going, no. This is about you. This isn't about me. This idea, it's about you and your trip. In terms of debilitating, I guess to go with around the same time, honestly, one of the very first film and TV auditions I ever did, and this was in the mid-90s for a terrific show called The Hat Squad. Not really a terrific show. I think, what was it? It was like, I was Raheem, and the rapist was, I mistook the detectives for the rapist and went on a short monologic tirade about, like, in my country, like if you guys know this shit, like if my country, I would chop your hand would be chopped off just like this. And it was hilarious because it was, a mistaken rape identity thing. Wow. Yeah, that was kind of made me go, I'm not really sure.
Wow.
Right.
Well, actually, a life-changing experience was just this last film that I did with Anousha called Red Snow. And the reason that I got this part was because I was Afghan. And this is I was approached for this part before I even became an actor. And I actually dedicated myself into this acting thing because of this particular role, because it meant so much to me. When I was presented with this script, the director approached me with this most incredible script. I couldn't have written a better role for myself if I tried, right? So I was like, oh my gosh, I haven't ever thought of acting before, but the fact that she has believed in me enough, to approach me with this. So I dedicated my time the next couple of years preparing for this role by getting into acting and starting, taking coaching and all that, just because I wanted, it meant so much to me. And when I actually did it, when I was on set, it was way better than I had even imagined. Just playing this character, for me, like I was approached by other directors before when I was in music, because it happens, like, oh, you're famous, you got a lot of followers, and it'll help. But I was looking for something. I was looking for a strong character, and I was approached to play parts like victim roles, and I wasn't. They say that your first role is very important because that's how they will portray you afterwards, and that's where you'll be placed. So it was very important to me that I have the strongest role possible in this. And being Afghan, being a Pashtun girl from the tribal areas, having to learn that second national language of Afghanistan really meant a lot to me too.
So, arm the peeps listening with some wisdom, some advice, some knowledge, just like a one-line thing that you can tell them going away. What advice you would give them?
I'm sorry, advice to whom?
I could be corny and be like, your younger self, or
okay.
To the peeps listening at home.
Don't do it.
Yeah.
But like,
Yes.
what,
Stay in school.
what do you hope people know if they're going to come into this business and they identify as whatever this MENA thing is that we've been talking about? What would you want them to know?
And it's taken me a long time to come to this, but know yourself. Spend time figuring out who you are and how you're unique. And then when you're okay with that, you don't have to shove it down people's throats. Be yourself for yourself. Find your identity. All this talk these days of how you identify, and it's this abstract concept, but it's really this personal process of who are you? What is your voice? And once you know that, then you can navigate this industry with some peace of mind and not harbor all this guilt because you did it wrong. Just know yourself and be okay with yourself, and then you don't have to force people to see you and treat you the way you see yourself, because you can't educate everybody.
Well, on behalf of UBCP ACTRA, it's been an honor and a pleasure. I think these videotapes will be really informative and empowering for a lot of people. So thank you for joining us for the MENA Roundtable.